Okay, Mr. Walker, if you can, look directly into that camera. If you could say your first and last name and spell it out for us, please.
John Walker, JOHNWALKER.
John, tell us your story and what happened, and really, in a couple of minutes, just kind of tell what of the things you've been through and just your case and just everything. Just give us an overall.
At age 16, me and four of my friends was investigated for a murder of a William Crossword, a 62-year-old white man. Consequently, one of our friends was turned state evidence, was forced to turn state evidence against the other four of us. Three of us was found guilty of this murder and sentenced to jail with 17, 20, and 25 years to life sentences. The fourth one was found not guilty. As we went and spent over 100 years between the three of us in prison and got out, we began to try to, find out what really happened to us. And we began to fight to have our case brought to court. And it seems at this point, we have lost the fight because the person who did this to us back in 1976 is now the head court, Supreme Court justice downtown. Every time we put in paperwork to get our case heard, the paperwork go across his desk, and it seems not to get nowhere. We can't seem to get nowhere as long as he's in office right now.
How much time did you do?
I did 22 years inside of prison, and I did the last 19, almost 19 years on lifetime parole out here.
How does that make you feel, John? I mean, how did you feel? I guess the first years, and even being in jail for something that you didn't do. How did that make you feel, and how does it make you feel today?
When I first went to jail, it didn't really dawn on me what they had done to me. I was only 16 years old, so I didn't really understand until I was in Elmira after about 4 years. And a lot of my friends that began to go home after 4 years, they sentenced, and I began to wonder, well, when might I go home? And when I realized how much time I had left to do before I seen the parole board, it really kind of like hit me real hard. And, I began to do the time a different way. Then I began to, try to do things to make it so that when I did come in front of a parole board, that I would be, more likely to be accepted on parole. So when I first went to jail, I didn't really realize. It took me 4.5 years to realize, what I was really into. And as I sit here now and think about the whole thing, it's just like it was they wasted my life for something I had nothing to do with.
And how does it make you feel today?
Like I was cheated out of something. Like, I'm not good enough to go back in the courts and prove my innocence. I know that if it was, more or less a white guy, trying to fight the same fight I'm fighting, I believe he'd have had a lot more success. It's only because of the color of my skin that I'm not in court.
What type of faith? Let me ask you. Right now, the criminal justice system with police officers and things of that sort.
Can I backtrack? I'm sorry, because I want to stay on the subject before you switch gears. I'm really sorry. Do you think the crime that they committed you for or you were convicted of was an act of racism? And if so, explain how.
Yeah, I do believe it was an act of racism, particularly because it was 1976 January. This was the first homicide of 1976. It was an elderly white man that got murdered, and they found five black guys, young black guys, to put it on. That's where I believe it was racist at, because of the fact that it was an elderly white man that got murdered. And back in 1976, Buffalo was very, very racial. And I believe they felt like they had to solve this murder, and they just gave it to us.
What was some of the things how it was handling? Like, okay, now you and your friends, were you like somewhere else? And how was the cops' demeanor when they approached you, interrogation room? Explain the process, even down to the courts, where not just you getting arrested was the act of racism, but keeping you there and still to this day now reopen your case. Kind of talk about it step by step with all the encounters of racism from the day
Okay.
you're arrested.
Well, if I understand the question right, what I believe about how it became racist and what they did to me. First of all, like I said, because it was a white man, they came and gathered up 4 or 5 black young men, and all throughout the trials and everything, I can recall myself sitting there really being the only black person in the whole courtroom. My lawyer was white, the district attorney was white, the judge was white, the victim was white, everybody in the jury box was white. Out of all of us that went to trial, none of us, and we had 4 different trials, 12 jury members. Out of all of our jury members, not one black person sit on our trial. So that in itself was racist. The fact that, we didn't have nobody in the courtroom looking like us, or nobody, there was only one person that finally looked like us. And to this day, James McLeod, he a judge now. He was the 4th guy, the last one that went to trial. He was their attorney, and he the only one got an acquittal. So I feel like, maybe if I had a black attorney, maybe I might not, suffer what I suffered through. But that's why I believe it should not never have been based on the color of our skin. It should always been based on the evidence. And if you base it on the evidence, there was no way possible we could have committed this murder. And when you look at it, that's the bottom line of how it's racist, because they did not go on the evidence. They went only on the fact that we was young black kids. Excuse me.
Now, your Cody, who turned state's evidence, what would you say to him, or what happened with that? Do you think he was forced to do that? And obviously, that sounds like that was even an act of racism in itself to have the police say you guys did it and knowing you didn't. Explain his story a little bit and what happened with that and the outcome now.
Out of the 5 of us that was accused of this murder, he was the only one that never had any type of police contact. His father was a preacher, and so he was a goody-goody guy and never had police contact. So, and I've talked to him numerous of times after this here, and in the beginning, I was mad at him. I was really, upset with him, because how could you help them do this to us when you knew we didn't have nothing to do with it? But as time went by and I began to learn things, I know for a fact now that when you have professional interrogators and you are a 16-year-old guy, they can make you say and do things that didn't necessarily happen. I didn't believe that before, but I'm a firm believer in that now. That as a 16-year-old, when you go into their rooms and they got guns on their side, they're doing all kind of tactics that they've learned to do. You don't have a chance there. So I long ago forgave him, even before I came out of prison. I forgave him because I realized that it could have been any one of us that they forced to do that to the rest of us. So I long ago forgave him, and when I first got out, I let him know that I forgave him. I let him know that I didn't take it as though he did me wrong no more. And after he knew that I forgave him, he began to help us out, trying, come to any event I would give to try, talk about our case. He would come to the events, he would tell his story and tell how he was forced to tell these stories against us by ways of, they would trick him with phone calls saying that, one of the other guys upstairs is about to testify against you and say that you did it, so you'll be going to jail for the rest of your life if you don't say this. He told me that, by them having guns on their sides and the way they was talking to him and, doing little things to him, it was intimidating to him. All kind of little intimidating things. He also told me that, he spent all that time that we spent in a jail, he was in prison in his own mind. He could no longer stay in Buffalo because he believed that our family was going to do something to him. So he moved out of Buffalo. He tried going into the Army to try to get away from. He said everywhere he went, it bothered him. And then when I came out and I began to, hit the newspapers about our stories and stuff, his kids began to ask him questions about it. And so he had to come clean with his kids and tell his kids what really happened. So it kind of affected him. I won't say almost as much as us, but it affected him to this day, and it still affected him.
Yeah, I remember seeing the footage. He was crying when he got up in front of everybody and he told what really happened. I remember seeing that footage. It's pretty deep. It's pretty deep. Back to you, Pete. I'm sorry.
Where is your case today? Right now, you said you're trying to reopen the case. You've served a significant amount of time. What is the purpose of you doing that, and where does the case stand right now?
Okay, the purpose of me doing all of the things I did was just to try to make my case a high-profile case, because I do understand that they'll look at high-profile cases. So I've given rallies, dinners, marches, everything I could possibly give, and it was all done just to get a day in court. I figured I gave them almost 40 years of my life now, and all I asked for in return was a day in court so they can hear my side of the story. And I've been denied that every turn I take. I've been denied it. I was told by a law firm that did our 440 motion that they would charge us $1.2 million for the brief that they put in for us. They did it pro bono, so we didn't have to pay it at that time, but they believed in us enough to give up $1.2 million worth of their time and put it in. And just by a 2-3 page motion by the district attorney from District Attorney, now Supreme Court Justice Timothy Jury, we was denied access in the court. And when you look at it, Timothy Jury is the one who did this to us. He was the district attorney back then. He manufactured evidence. He did everything he could to put us in jail. He had me move from one place to another just so a jailhouse informant can testify and say that he heard me saying things that I committed the murder. He did everything in his power to keep us, to put us in jail and to get us convicted of this murder. And now when we come out 30-something years later, all the paperwork that we have to put in to try to get this case back in court had to go right back in front of him. And it's obvious that he wasn't going to overturn nothing or let us back in court, because if we get back in court, we get to tell a story about what he did to us. And being as though he's the most powerful man down in the downtown in the justice system right now, we can't beat him. We don't have enough power to beat him or to, get into court. I just don't see how all the things we came up with, things that, was obvious that, we couldn't have had during the trial times that they withheld from us, things that they did to us, all of the things we put in, and they couldn't even get us one day in court. And now I've given them 40 years of my life, and I can't get not one day back in court. So that's where the case lie at right now, me trying to find another vehicle to get into court.
Yeah, I actually wrote a script about this. It kind of reminds me of Hurricane Carter, kind of like the same thing. Now, you still on parole?
Yeah, 19 years on parole, never had a violation, never went back to jail for nothing. 19 years on parole, and I'm scheduled to go back, February 18th now.
So you did 40 years in time, and it's possibility you could still be on parole for the rest of your life.
It's not only a possibility, it's a fact right now. They have told me in many ways. One time I had a parole officer, a lady, and everybody else, because this one guy was in Attica with me. And back in 1974, he killed the woman, and then he doused her house with gasoline and set it on fire trying to hide his crime. So we went through Attica and Collins together. I got out, and about 5-6 years later, he got out. So I'm talking to him, telling him, yo, you got to do this, get you a job, don't get in no trouble this way, that way, trying to tell him what to do to stay out here, because I had been out here for almost 8 years at this time. And 4 years later, he come back to me and tell me, hey, man, I'm off parole. I'm like, how do you get off of parole with a crime like that, more vicious than the crime they accused me of? And I'm steady telling them that I didn't have nothing to do with it, but they let him off of parole. But me, I can't get off parole. My co-defendant, he had transferred his parole down to California. And California, after 4 years, saw fit to let him off parole. When New York State got wind that he was off parole in California, they went back to California and got him and brought him back up here and forcing him to do lifetime parole with me. So me and him is on lifetime parole. Nobody else in the state of New York is doing as much parole time as we done.
How did your friend get off parole?
He only because he went to California.
No, not him, the other one that you were locked up with in Attica, and who told you, like, hey, man, I'm off parole. What did he do?
That's the same one.
No, the one you said he burned a house down.
Oh, how did he get off parole?
Yeah, how did he get off?
Just good behavior. 4 years of not getting in no trouble, he was off parole. And again, I said I gave him almost 19 now. No trouble, no violations, yet I'm still on parole. And it's only because they say I refuse to show remorse. But how do you show remorse for something that you ain't do? How do you show remorse for that?
What was jail like? What were the COs like? Would you consider that like modern day slavery?
Not necessarily doing most of my time, because when I went there, most of the guys, the COs, they was all older guys. Older people that just came in to do 8 hours a shift and went back home. Whereas I know in the last part of my bid, I'm noticing that the correctional officers, they was more younger. more vibrant, more wanting you to start something so they can get at you. You know, they was into it more. They might only had an 8-hour shift, but you could tell this was their life. So it changed that way. It was easier back in the time. Everybody, you know, you remember the Attica riot and everything. Attica wasn't as bad as they portrayed it to be when I went there. Actually, I credited Attica with keeping me sane because of the football seasons. You know, that's what kept me going because, you know, just to know football, play football, that's the only thing I had, you know, that kept me going. So Attica wasn't bad. The correctional officer, they wasn't as bad back then as they was or when I was leaving the jail. They're more younger now. I can recall one time an incident in Attica Yard where two correctional officers walking around the yard. There was a lot of snow out there and everything. So one of the older correctional officers, he slipped and fell. And when he fell, you know, me being a prisoner, I'm laughing at him, you know, good, hope you broke your neck, whatever. But I can remember when we was coming back in that night, they pulled me out of line. And they whooped my ass for laughing at the older guy. And I didn't realize I didn't realize what I was doing to myself at that time by laughing at him because he fell. But I learned real fast that, you know, those are things that you just don't do or they will do something to you.
John, I can see it's a lot of, of course you're still dealing with this. I mean, it's a painful, issue for you to even talk about. My question to you is that if you never get your case retried, what advice do you give to the young black males out here about the criminal justice system?
Well, in short and simple, stay out of it. Don't get into the criminal justice system because it's slavery. That's all it is now is just complete slavery. I can remember working a full work week and might have $13 in my account. All of the things I can remember, if you go to any school and you see cabinets, filing cabinets, garbage cans, and they had a sign on there that say core craft. That's from Attica Correction Facility. I remember making all of these filing cabinets and garbage cans, and I remember getting maybe 30 cents an hour. It's just slave labor. They not doing no good for us, and it seems like these days we killing ourselves to get in there where they're not doing nothing but using us to make their products, to make their lives better. And we act like we don't even care no more. You know, I see so many young black guys standing out on the corner with nothing to do. And I often ask myself, what is the point? I mean, what can we do? I often know where they're going to all end up at, either killing somebody and going to jail or getting murdered themselves. Seem like it ain't nothing here for us no more. So my advice to the young black guys is, and it sounds like an old cliche that I didn't want to hear. My mother and father told me that all the time, but education. If you ain't got no education, you ain't going nowhere. Nowhere but to jail where they can use guys that don't have no education.
All right. John, what has prison done to you?
It's hardened me. It's made me sneaky. It's made me be able to deal with reality all the time. You know, it wasn't nothing really phony about prison. Everything was just real. And I kind of applied that to life out here. It ain't no phony. It's just real. That's what it done to me. It just made me look at life in a completely different way. You know, from now I look at life from, I guess, the bad perspective first and try to find good. I don't know. I believe that. I don't know. It done something to me. But one thing I can say about it is I always had a short memory, and there's so much of that what happened in prison that I don't even think about. I don't got no more memories of. It's like my mind almost washed away from it, where I don't have no more. I don't sit down and think about what happened in prison no more. I very rarely even have a thought about prison. It wasn't for me.
Are you upset with white people?
I'm upset with the system that was ran by white people. It's not necessarily white people that I'm upset with, but the system that took my life away from me was ran by all white people.
The judicial system says that 1 out of every 3 blacks will see jail at some point in their life. Why do you think that is?
Cause set up that way. You know, the neighborhoods we live in. You know, everything is geared towards us seeing prison at least one time. It's geared towards that. You know, even by them standing out on the corner, their chances of being picked up is increased. So everything that's going on in our neighborhoods, the lack of jobs, you know, everybody got no money, so you're gonna go out and try to do things that might end up you getting picked up, you know, put in jail. So it's like society, at least here in Buffalo, society is just made that most of our black people gonna see the inside of prison. And I always thought and prayed that my 9-year-old son don't never see the inside of prison. That was my thing, that I'm gonna make sure that I did enough time for me and him. But, you know, more and more I could see that it's set up for him to see it just as well it was for me.
What do you mean by that? Why?
Circumstances haven't changed. It ain't like, you know, his life is any easier than mine was. And that's because my life has been hard and I'm his sole provider. So life is not easy for him. Ain't nothing gonna be given to him either. He gonna have to earn everything. And when it's like you gotta earn everything, every now and then you gonna slip up.
I feel like your situation was passed on to your son. Would you say that's accurate?
Not only was it passed on to my son, but it was passed back to my father. My father's name is John Walker, Sr. And while I was in Attica and Collins, my father used to come to the jail and I watched it. You know, the stress it had on him, to where he was coming in with the oxygen machine on, had the tubes up his nose and everything. But I knew that my being there, and he knew that I was there for something that I didn't do. I knew that that had a profound effect on him and that it was killing him. So it's not only had an effect on me, John Walker II, but had an effect on my father, John Walker II. And I'm so aware of that it's going to also have an effect on John Walker III.
Fire?
Our judicial system claims that people serve trial with the notion that they're innocent until proven guilty. However, your story seems the adverse. I want you to just think about when you stood trial. How did you feel during these moments leading up to your decision?
That's not true. It's definitely you're guilty until you could prove yourself innocent. That's the way it really is. I sat in court, I couldn't really talk for myself. And even at age 16, 17, when I was going to trial, I wouldn't even knew what to say anyway. But I could recall myself sitting at the defense table playing tic-tac-toe while they was discussing what they was doing with my life. I didn't have no understanding of what they was doing to me. I knew that I hadn't committed this crime, so I was really under the impression that at the end of the day, I was going to be released and took back home to my family, but didn't turn out that way. So
At what moment did you realize that it was completely out of your hands?
when they first came and arrested me, and the first time they came and picked us up for questioning, they took us down to the precinct and then they released us. It was still in my hands or in my parents' hands. But the second time when they came and actually arrested us for the murder of William Crawford, and they put the handcuffs on me and wouldn't let me go home no more, I knew then it wasn't in my hand no more.
And how did these officers treat you?
Again, this was officers from way back then where, I just didn't have the sense or know as much about officers and what they should and shouldn't do as I do now. I didn't know about that then. And by that I mean, and sometimes I'm ashamed to say this, but when they came to pick me up, they had already had 2 of my co-defendants in the police car ahead of me. And when they came and got me, they put me in the back car by myself. And one of the officers noticed, because my 2 co-defendants, you know, lifted their hands up to show me that they was in handcuffs. So he said, "Oh, they're in handcuffs. I better handcuff you." And he passed me the handcuffs back, and I put the handcuffs on myself. You know, they was very nice to me then. But as I go back as an adult now and I read, it was one, a black detective. He the one that really had me personally arrested. And as I went back and started reading him and what he was doing to me and everything there, he was just as racial and nasty as the rest of them. But, you know, they did what they had to do. They tricked me. They played like everything was all right. So they did their job, I guess. What I feel about police officers now, I believe that they're needed. We do need police officers. No police officer would be like no good out here. Everybody would be killing themselves. So I do believe that we need them. But it's just that when they do things that affect other people's life, you know, it's no good because they're in a position where they can affect other people's life. And they're being paid to do the right thing. Not most, but a lot of them doing wrong things. So I have mixed feelings about them.
How does all the current events make you feel? With Trayvon, Sandra Bland, Tamir Rice?
I'm mad. I'm mad because they had a Trayvon Martin rally here in Buffalo. A lot of people showed up. A lot of people. I even showed up. I gave a rally, 20-something people showed up. So I always felt when I see like Trayvon and all them, I'm kind of feeling two ways on that. You know, I think what they did to Trayvon and all them, you know, we got to talk about that. We got to stop that shit. We can't have them keep doing that. Same time, what about me? It seemed like, you know, nobody ain't rallying enough for me. You know, I've had a lot of support here and there, but never to the point that I felt like that's just what we needed. It was like people didn't come out for me. So.
Pledge allegiance.
Hey, why don't you think they support you or come out for you? What is it about you that you think is holding this up? What do you really think?
I think it might have something to do with my personal life, the way I live now. You know, I ain't saying I'm no angel. I ain't saying I'm no goody-goody guy. But sometimes I think that people would take somehow or how I'm living now and to judge me on that when I'm not asking nobody to judge me on how I'm really living now. I'm asking you to judge me on my case and what happened in my case.
How are you living now, John?
Any way I can get it. I ain't got no choice. I can't work. I'm disabled. I'm doing anything I possibly could to take care of my child. I have a 9-year-old son, and I just want to see him with things that I never had. I want to see him go places that I never went. And I definitely don't never want to see him inside of a prison. So how I'm living now? Well, that's just like everybody else in Buffalo living. Getting any way we could get it, just trying to stay alive, trying to survive.
What are you, John? Are you a black man, African American? What are you? What would you classify yourself as?
Black man. Sounds more, you know, real. African American. I mean, I ain't never been to Africa. I ain't been in none of them. So I know I'm here in America, and I do believe that this is ours just like as anybody else, because I believe we did more to build over here than anybody else. So I believe that America is mine, but I don't feel connected to it. I don't feel like this is part of mine.
Last thing, when, you know, as kids, we say, you know, as kids, they're in school right now, they do the Pledge of Allegiance every single morning. It ends with liberty and justice for all. What do you have to say about that?
It's a falsehood. They ain't trying to get justice for all. If it was, then, you know, there's nobody, I mean, all the cases here in Buffalo, ain't nobody came up with more evidence to prove that they didn't have nothing to do with the crime that they was convicted of than me. You know, if it was justice for all, my case would have been heard in spite of the fact that the person that did this to me is now the head justice downtown. If the justice system was all of that, one man shouldn't have been able to stop that. And this is why I'm upset with the system, because one man should not be able to stop the system from, you know, being consistent and giving out justice. And when it got to me, this one man is stopping me from even getting one day in court. And I just don't see how you could take 40 years of my life for something you said I did, and I cannot get not one day in court. Not one day in court. And this is what really upsets me all the time. It's not, if you took me back to court and said that we still believe you did this here, okay, at least I had a chance to go to court. But when you don't even let me in court, do you know it took me 10 years to have my first appeal? Anybody else, a year to 18 months before you had your first appeal. It's your right to have your appeal within the first 18 months of your conviction. Everybody do. For me, it took 10 years to get my first appeal. That in itself is violating all of my rights. 10 years to get your first appeal. That's a record that I have in this justice system. The 10 years it took me to get my first appeal. I have another record in the justice system, 4.5 years on the work release program. Nobody else in the state of New York ever did 4.5 years on the work release program. I have another record in the state of New York. Nobody else ain't never did no 19 years on parole without no violations. All three of these things are things I'm leading in the New York State, and I don't want to no more.
Let me, what's some of the most radical thoughts that you had about your case? If no one has listened to you, what's some of the, I guess, the worst stuff that came across your mind, like, you know?
Well, I thought the last one was the worst thing I did, where I took a chain and I bolted the chain to a bowling ball, and I wrote parole on it, and I went to all the rallies with the chain locked to my ankle, because that's how I feel like, parole is an extra weight on me. And the most radical one I was thinking about doing next was I was going to try to somehow nail myself to a cross, put it up right in downtown Buffalo. It feel like I'm being persecuted like Jesus or somebody. Anything to make somebody look and find a way to get me back in the court. I don't care how radical it is. I don't care what nobody think. If I had to stand out there naked to get back in the court or to get my case back heard, that's what I'll do, no matter how radical it is.
So, I just lost my train of thought on what I was going to ask you. With your case being overturned, would you call yourself, would you say you were a criminal before you went to jail, or would you call yourself a criminal now, or what do you?
I was more of a criminal before I went to jail. I was a juvenile. Be honest with you, I had just come home from a juvenile institution 6 months before I was charged with this murder. So before, I was more or less a criminal. Now, I don't have the capacity to be a criminal. I don't have the physical capacity to be a criminal at all right now. There's nothing much I could do. I could barely even walk.
If they got your case reopened, what would you want? Would you want money, or would you want to just be off parole? What does John Walker want for reparation?
To be out, to be off parole and to be able to talk to other youth. That's all, just to be off parole and to be able to travel and go. I've never been to a family reunion outside of Buffalo. The only time I ever went outside of Buffalo when I was 14 years old and went to Alabama with my father. Other than that, I'm stuck here in Buffalo all my life. So
normally when cases are returned and people did time for crimes they didn't commit, they normally get like millions sometimes. Would you like want some kind of money, or would you feel if they did open a case and they just let you off parole and then didn't give you any money, would that be just?
no, not in comparison to everybody else, it wouldn't be. If my case was overturned, yeah, I would want some compensation, just like they compensated Lynn Dijak, just like they compensated the other guy, can't think of his name right now, but everybody else get compensated for it. So yeah, I would probably want to be compensated for it, but that's not the main issue. The main issue is money and all of that, that's one thing, but when you are alive, but you are not in possession of your life, that's the number one. All the money in the world, I'm not in possession of my life, the money ain't really what's happening. So I guess the number one thing to me would be to first become back in possession of my life. And then I would like to be compensated so that I can enjoy the remainder of my life, since they took all of my life from me.